I froze in the hallway, my hand still resting on the chipped paint of the wall, as my son's voice drifted out from the dining room. "She'll be gone soon anyway. Don't bother giving her a room." His wife's laugh followed like glass breaking. Gone soon. After building this home brick by brick, after every bill paid in my name, after every sacrifice that kept their world intact, I was already gone to them. But weeks later, when the moving trucks pulled up and the deed carried only my name, they finally learned who was leaving. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. The coat slid off Janet's shoulders with the weight of 100 thoughts. She laid it over the back of the armchair by the entryway, carefully smoothing the sleeves as if neatness might hold something together. The smell of roasted turkey and sweet potatoes wafted through the house, but it didn't warm her. The chatter of family echoed from the dining room, clinking silverware, occasional bursts of laughter. All too loud, all too distant. She took a slow breath and turned toward the hallway. That's when she heard it. Daniel's voice. Low, casual, barely above a whisper. "She'll be gone soon anyway. Don't bother giving her a room." Janet stopped mid-step. Her heel didn't quite touch the hardwood. Her heart did. Then Kelly, with a dry snicker, replied, "She'll outlive her welcome before dessert." The words didn't land like a slap. Slaps are quick. These sank in slow, like ice crawling under her skin. Janet didn't move. Her fingers rested lightly against the wall for balance, the cheap paint cool and slightly chipped beneath her touch. She stared at the family portrait hung crooked just above the thermostat. One of those fake happy Christmas shots from 5 years ago when things were still pretending to be okay. She wasn't supposed to hear that, but she did. The hallway light flickered once, and her breath caught. Not from fear, from clarity. She swallowed hard and blinked. She didn't cry. Not here. In the dining room, the noise rolled on. Aunt Lori describing some yoga retreat, Uncle Drew chewing too loudly, forks scraping against porcelain. No one noticed she hadn't come in yet. No one noticed anything. She straightened her posture and walked in slowly, keeping her face a careful blank. Daniel glanced up from the far end of the table, his expression unreadable, then returned to carving the ham as if nothing had passed between his lips just moments ago. Kelly sat beside him, swiping through something on her phone, a wine glass tilted lazily in her hand. She didn't even look up. Janet took the only open seat near the edge, across from Ruth's teenage daughter, who was already halfway through her plate. She didn't touch the food in front of her. Her phone buzzed quietly in her coat pocket, muffled by fabric and the hollow silence now roaring in her chest. She excused herself with a smile no one saw and stood up again, walking back to the front room where the air was colder and her pulse could breathe. From the coat pocket, she pulled out her phone. "Ruth, how's dinner going? You okay?" Her thumb hovered. What could she even say? She stared out the small front window. Outside, the street was empty. The porch light cast weak shadows across the lawn. The neighbors had already turned in. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and fell silent. Inside, the noise of family continued like a river running around a rock. She stood still. Her phone buzzed again. "Ruth, just blink twice if you need to be rescued." That made her smile, genuinely, quietly. For a second, the knot in her chest loosened. She typed back, "I'm fine. Same old show. You were right about the cast." Ruth's reply came in seconds. "Ruth, don't let them shrink you." Janet stared at that message longer than she meant to. The hallway behind her creaked slightly and she turned. But no one was there. She tucked her phone away, smoothed her blouse and walked calmly back toward the dining room. The seat still waited for her, untouched. So did the silence between every bite and every word, and so did the woman she was not going to be anymore. The clock on the microwave read 12:17 a.m., but Janet had stopped looking at time the usual way. Minutes didn't pass anymore. They pressed, thick and slow, like fog over glass. She moved barefoot across the living room, each floorboard reminding her exactly where it creaked. Daniel and Kelly had gone to bed an hour ago, their doors shut tight on the other side of the hallway like their affection. Quiet, closed, convenient. She didn't bother turning on all the lights, just the amber glow of the desk lamp in the corner. It flickered once, then held. The bulb was warm, almost too warm, but the light it gave off was soft and clean, and that mattered more tonight than comfort. She knelt in front of the old oak desk and slid open the bottom drawer. Her hand hesitated over the keys, then selected the smallest one on the ring, the one she hadn't touched since before the hospital, before Daniel's tone had hardened into something brittle. The lock clicked open with a small metallic sigh. She pulled out the file folders with slow precision, one after another, worn manila edges smoothed flat with the care of someone who'd once been proud of keeping everything in order. Pensions, Roth IRA statements, CDs, mutual funds. She'd built them like bricks over years, quiet, unassuming bricks. No one had paid them any attention. Until now. She paused at a thick white envelope in the middle of the stack. The handwriting on it was hers, neat, restrained, but the words made her fingers stop cold. Property equity. She knew what was in it. Not just numbers, not just deeds. Power. That's what this was. All the equity she'd helped build while Daniel smiled in suits and took credit for things she made easy. All the refinancing she'd negotiated, the insurance she'd chosen, the mortgage overpayments she'd insisted on, even when it meant skipping new clothes or weekend trips. She set it carefully aside, not because she was done with it, because she'd come back to it last. The rest of the documents she placed into a neat, deliberate pile, like proof, not to them, to herself. Proof that she had not been a passenger in her own life, that her name wasn't ornamental on the paperwork, that she was the reason any of this was still standing. The phone rang. The sound was sharp in the stillness, and for a split second, her breath caught. She reached for it quickly before the ring could wake the house. "Hello?" she whispered. "Don't you dare let them treat you like trash." Ruth's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It carried the kind of weight that only old friends could wield, friends who'd seen you cry over dinner rolls and still stayed on the phone afterward. Janet didn't say anything at first. She let the words settle around her like armor. Then, quieter than the rustle of papers beneath her fingertips, she replied, "I won't. Not again." There was no tremble in her voice, no apology laced in her tone. Just the gentle, grounded sound of someone who had finally stopped trying to shrink herself into gratitude. She stayed on the phone with Ruth for another minute, saying nothing, just breathing. A different kind of silence now, shared, not forced. When she finally hung up, she tucked the phone beside the lamp and reached for the envelope again. This time, her hand didn't shake. She didn't open it yet, just held it. Let its quiet weight remind her that her story was not something they could erase, and neither was she. The bell above the cafe door jingled with a softness that didn't match Janet's mood. It was Tuesday morning, technically her day off, but she wore her best coat anyway. Not for warmth, for armor. She stepped inside the Roost, Ruth's cafe, and let the cinnamon honey smell of fresh pastries settle around her like a different kind of home. Ruth looked up from behind the counter, her eyes scanning Janet's face before words even formed. No smile, just a nod, and 2 mugs slid down the polished wood like muscle memory. Janet took her usual booth near the window, the one with the chipped tile at her feet. Her coat stayed on. She sat stiff, her hands flat against the table as if bracing for impact that had already come. Ruth joined her seconds later, coffee steaming between them, no pleasantries exchanged. "I heard them," Janet said, her voice low and surgical. "They thought I was down the hall. Daniel said not to bother giving me a room." Kelly laughed, "Said I'd outlive my welcome before dessert." Ruth's jaw tightened. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Janet took a long sip of coffee, her hands wrapped around the mug, fingertips steady. "And he's sleeping just fine in the master suite, like nothing happened. Like I'm furniture with a fading warranty." Ruth slammed her mug on the table hard enough to make the silverware clink. "Buy them out." Janet didn't flinch. She reached into her leather satchel and pulled out a worn envelope, the same one she hadn't opened the night before. This time, she had. Inside were carefully sorted documents, printed bank statements, retirement summaries, the last 3 years of joint account activity. Her fingers moved swiftly, spreading the numbers across the table like cards in a high-stakes game. Ruth leaned forward. "Jesus, Janet, this is real." "I know." Janet tapped one sheet gently, her tone analytical now. "The house is worth $482,000. The mortgage has less than $60,000 left. The equity is almost all mine. I refinanced it under my name in 2015. He just signed where I told him to." Ruth's brow arched. "And he never noticed?" "He didn't read anything I handed him. Never thought he had to." Janet allowed the smallest curl of a smile to touch her lips. But it faded just as fast. "I'm offering to buy out his share. Clean, legal, no drama. If he wants a war, he'll have to start it himself." Just then, Ruth's phone buzzed against the sugar jar. She flipped it over instinctively, but Janet caught the screen. Kelly posted, "Our forever home, Pa. Blessed life. Cozy corners." Janet's eyes didn't widen. They narrowed. She took the phone, studied the photo. A filtered shot of Kelly's manicured hand on the banister, the one Janet had sanded and stained herself during a 4th of July weekend while Daniel watched sports. The caption sat beneath it like syrup over rot. Janet handed the phone back. Her lips pressed into a line so tight it might have drawn blood if she moved them. "She thinks it's hers," Ruth muttered, disgust edging her voice. Janet's tone was calm. "She's half right. And the other half?" Janet gathered the papers, lined them up perfectly, then slid them back into the envelope. She looked up, eyes sharp now. Dry. Clear. "I just haven't spoken yet." The house next door had the same bones as hers. Same builder, same year, same number of windows looking out over the sleepy cul-de-sac. But this one wore its age differently. Its shutters sagged. The grass had gone brittle in the heat. A patch of siding on the back porch peeled like old paint on a memory. Janet walked through it quietly, heels muted on the worn hardwood. Her eyes didn't scan like a buyer's. They moved like someone measuring possibility. Thomas trailed behind, clipboard in hand, button down too crisp for the summer air. "She's in good shape," he said, nodding toward the kitchen where the linoleum had started curling at the corners. "Just needs updates." Janet didn't answer right away. She paused at the dining room arch, where a nail still stuck out above the trim. A family photo must have hung there once. Now it held only a faint shadow and the weight of something gone. "I'm not updating anything," she said. "I'm changing the locks." They reached the living room where the Sellers waited. An older couple, maybe in their 70s, both sitting on the low floral couch like they hadn't quite decided whether this was grief or relief. "We're on a timeline," the woman said softly, hands folded over her purse. "Our son's moving us to Arizona. Doctor said it's time." Janet offered a kind nod. "I understand." The man shifted forward, elbows on knees. "We need someone who can move quick. No games, no drawn-out escrow, no back and forth." Janet reached into her tote and pulled out a blue envelope. She opened it with care and laid the cashier's check on the coffee table, centered it between the coasters. The old man blinked. His wife leaned forward. "It's dated today," Janet said. "And it clears, today." Neither spoke, but something in their shoulders settled, a quiet kind of release. Thomas cleared his throat, then motioned toward the dining room where a folding card table had been set up, papers already arranged in neat stacks. Janet took her seat with no hesitation. He slid the documents toward her. Standard transfer. No contingencies. Full cash offer. She pulled a pen from her coat pocket. Not a ballpoint. A fountain pen. Sleek, matte black, engraved with her initials. A gift she'd once saved for something important. She clicked it open and began signing. One page, flip, sign. Next. Her hand didn't pause. Not once. At the end, Thomas turned to the notary, a woman with reading glasses pushed high into her curls and a stamp in her left hand. "Linda," he said gently, "we're ready." Linda lined up the deed, checked Janet's ID, and pressed the embossed seal into the paper with the finality of a gavel. "It's official," she said. Janet exhaled. Not relief, resolution. She stood slowly, gathering the signed paperwork and slipping it into her satchel without fanfare. No handshake, no congratulations. This wasn't celebration, it was strategy. Outside, the sun had crept higher, casting long streaks of light across the neighbor's lawn, the one she used to trim herself when Daniel was too tired from work. The air was warm, but she didn't feel it. She was already thinking 4 moves ahead. Thomas followed her to the curb, tucking his clipboard under one arm. "I gotta ask," he said, voice careful. "You're keeping this quiet, right? Not listing it, not flipping it?" Janet turned to him. Her expression was unreadable, not cold. Not angry, just contained. "I'm not flipping anything," she said. "I'm planting roots where they thought I'd disappear." He gave a slow nod, then looked back at the house. "You'll want new locks by the weekend." "I already called a locksmith," she said. "He's meeting me here at 5. She opened her car door, then paused. Across the street, Kelly stood on the porch, barefoot, coffee mug in hand, bathrobe cinched too tight like she knew something was slipping. She hadn't noticed Janet yet. Janet watched her for a beat, then got in and drove off without a glance back. But the signature still pressed fresh in her bag. And her silence had never spoken louder. The Sunday roast was overcooked, but no one said it. Janet sat near the end of the table, a polite distance from the head where Daniel held court with his usual wineglass theatrics. Kelly nestled beside him, their elbows nearly touching, like proximity could prove permanence. The table was crowded, too crowded. Cousins, in-laws, and neighbors they barely liked filled the chairs. Laughter floated through the dining room like an air freshener, present, but artificial. Janet stirred her tea gently, once clockwise, once counter. The cup didn't rattle. Daniel raised his glass. "Here's to our forever home," he said, with a grin too wide for the room. "We're finally putting in that sunroom Kelly's been dreaming about. Contractors start in a month." Kelly lit up. "And the walk-in pantry," she added. "I've already picked tile." There were murmurs of approval. Someone asked if they'd be adding a skylight. Another chimed in with paint swatches. Janet didn't look up. She just kept stirring, one hand resting in her lap, her spine perfectly straight. Her phone buzzed silently against her thigh. She reached down with the same grace she might use to adjust a napkin. Screen up. Brightness low. Ruth. Stamped and recorded. Official as of noon. Attached was a photo of the deed, freshly embossed, legally binding, her name etched alone in the owner field. Not Daniel's, not Kelly's, just Janet. Her eyes lingered on the seal, on the glint of ink where the notary's stamp caught the light. Then she locked the screen, slid the phone back into her coat pocket, and lifted her teacup to her lips. A small, unreadable smile played at the edge of her mouth. Nothing theatrical, nothing for show, just a quiet awareness of weight shifting. Daniel reached across Kelly for the breadbasket and chuckled. Honestly, I think Janet will love the changes. That is, if she's still around when they finish. A few people laughed. Someone elbowed someone else. Janet lowered her cup, let the porcelain rest gently against the saucer. Her expression didn't change. She met Daniel's gaze across the table, not sharply, not sweetly, just long enough for him to notice she wasn't blinking. Then she turned her head slightly, addressing no one in particular. Sometimes change is faster than you think. Kelly tilted her head. What's that supposed to mean? Janet didn't answer. She unfolded her napkin and placed it beside her untouched plate. Excuse me? She said softly, rising from the table. Daniel called after her. You're not even going to try the roast? Kelly worked all day on it. Janet paused in the doorway, hands light at her sides. I didn't come for the food, she said. And she meant it. She stepped into the front hallway, the walls still lined with framed smiles and crooked memories. The scent of rosemary and burnt onion clung to the air like something that had once been pleasant, long ago. Outside, the evening air cooled her face as she walked to her car. Leaves had begun to scatter along the curb, dry, fluttering things that made no sound as she drove over them. Parked in her new driveway minutes later, she rolled the stamped deed out of her bag again. Not to stare at it, just to feel it. There was power in paper, yes, but more than that, there was finality. And Daniel? He could keep clinging to his fantasy of permanence. He didn't even know he was a guest. The keys made a small sound when she slid them onto her ring. Not a clink, but a click. The sound of something locking into place. Janet paused a moment before tucking the ring back into her coat pocket. Not because she doubted it. She didn't. It was just final now. No more forms, no more checks, no more waiting. It was hers. She stepped over the threshold of the house next door and closed the door behind her. No shoes this time. She wanted to feel the floor, the grain of it, the imperfections, the corners Daniel never noticed because he never bothered to look down. Sunlight filtered in from the back windows, casting angled shadows across the bare walls. It was silent, but not empty. Not to her. She walked through each room slowly, fingers gliding along the edges of built-ins, shelves, trim lines, like she was reacquainting herself with something she'd once owned in a dream. At the staircase, she stopped. The banister had a small chip near the middle, a clean little scar in the wood. She traced it with her thumb, then continued up the steps, each footstep slow and grounded. Ruth's voice broke the silence behind her. Hold still, she said. Janet turned from the upstairs landing, eyebrows raised. Ruth stood at the bottom with her phone aimed just right. This is history. The shutter clicked. Janet let out the faintest breath of a laugh, then leaned against the frame of the hallway. You're going to frame that, aren't you? She asked. Ruth grinned. Damn right. Maybe make it black and white, real dramatic. Janet shook her head, but didn't stop smiling. It wasn't a wide smile, or one meant for anyone else, just enough to remind her face what it felt like to mean something. They wandered the rooms together after that. Ruth made snide jokes about Kelly's walk-in pantry and Daniel's visionary taste in beige, and Janet chuckled in the way people do when they're laughing more at memory than punchlines. By late afternoon, Ruth had left, promising to bring champagne next time. Janet stayed. She sat on the floor in what would eventually be the reading room, legs crossed, back against the wall. The hardwood was cold through her jeans, but she liked that. It felt like beginning from something real. Her phone buzzed, screen face down beside her. She didn't pick it up right away. When she finally turned it over, she recognized the number. Daniel. A voicemail popped up. No text, no callback. Just the timestamp and the weight of a man who assumed he'd always have the final word. She pressed play. Hey, just wanted to give you a heads up, his voice said, casual and smug under the thin layer of false warmth. Kelly and I are meeting with the architect on Thursday, talking expansion plans. You know, making more room, maybe for future additions. There was a short pause. Then the kicker. Family's growing, right? The message ended. Janet stared at the screen. Not because she was shocked, but because he still believed his vision of the future was the only one that counted. She hit delete. The message disappeared. The silence returned. She leaned her head back against the wall, eyes closed for a moment. In another life, that voicemail would have cracked her wide open. She would have replayed it, read between the words, tried to find subtext in the pauses. But now it was just noise, and she had walls of her own. The morning air smelled faintly of rain, though the clouds hadn't broken yet. Janet stood by the window in her new kitchen, sipping coffee from a plain white mug that didn't match anything. Yet, she liked that. The silence was thicker today, more deliberate. She didn't fill it with music or podcasts or background news. She let it stretch. Across the alley, Kelly's laugh echoed faintly through their shared backyard fence. A high, sharp burst. The kind people perform when they want to be heard. Janet set the mug down and checked her phone. Not to scroll, just to skim. A habit she hadn't shaken yet, even if the way she looked at things had changed. At the top of her feed, Kelly's latest post. Couldn't love our forever home more. Cha married life. Cha home renovation. Achash dream team. The photo was perfectly staged. Kelly standing barefoot in the kitchen, fake candid smile turned toward the light, holding a paint swatch as if she knew what eggshell cool gray even meant. Daniel wasn't in the picture, but his arm made a cameo in the background, pointing at something like he had a plan. The caption had already racked up 30-some comments. Aunt Marion, so happy for you two. Cousin Elise, literal goals. Some woman Janet didn't recognize. When's the housewarming? She didn't like the post, didn't comment, didn't breathe, just kept scrolling. Ruth's message came in almost on cue. Ruth, they're building castles in sand, let 'em. Then, a second later, Ruth, still on for movers Thursday? Janet's fingers hovered over the screen a moment. Then she swiped to her calendar app, opened her planner where she tracked everything. Budgets, appointments, numbers, angles. She scrolled down to Thursday and typed, 9:30 a.m., delivery. She stared at the entry for a beat longer than necessary, then shut the app and locked the phone. The knock on the door startled her slightly, but not enough to show it. She crossed the bare living room and opened the front door. Two movers stood outside, early 30s, both in matching green company polos, one chewing gum with a rhythm that didn't quite match the morning stillness. You Janet? The taller one asked, checking a clipboard. Yes, she said. No flourish, no explanation. Just confirming delivery time for Thursday morning. 9:30 drop, right? She nodded. Right. We'll call before we pull up. Some of the stuff's heavy. That's fine, she said. I'm ready for it. They left without small talk, and she closed the door behind them, fingertips grazing the new brushed nickel handle, one of the first things she'd replaced. She walked through the living room again, empty walls echoing her steps. There was a certain kind of grace in a house without furniture, like stage lights before the curtain rises, the outline of what's coming. Back at the window, she glanced toward her old home. The curtains in the master bedroom were open. Kelly stood in front of a full-length mirror, phone tilted for another selfie, lips pursed in practiced admiration of herself. Janet didn't look away. She didn't envy her. She didn't pity her. She didn't feel anything. Just noted it. She grabbed her planner again, flipping backward this time. Notes from weeks ago. Little scribbles only she could read, red circles around transfer deadlines, names of contractors, mortgage terms, the lawyer Ruth had recommended, with a smiley face drawn beside it like an inside joke. This wasn't revenge. This was rebalancing. And Kelly? She could keep posting fairy tales. The deed said something different. The knock on her door wasn't tentative. It was deliberate, measured, like someone trying to assert presence before they even spoke. Janet didn't answer right away. She finished sipping her coffee, set the cup down on the kitchen counter, and wiped her hands slowly on a dish towel. When she opened the door, she was neither surprised nor interested. Daniel stood on the porch like he owned the air around him. Kelly loomed just behind, arms crossed, mouth tight in a smirk she hadn't earned. "Morning," Daniel said. His voice had the same edge it always carried when he thought he was being reasonable. "We need to talk." Janet leaned lightly against the doorframe. She didn't offer to let them in, didn't even step aside. "About what?" she asked. He gestured toward the house. "About this. About you suddenly buying property like it's Monopoly. You're not seriously planning to live here full-time, right?" Kelly scoffed. "She can't. That's, like, illegal or something?" Janet said nothing. Her expression didn't move. Daniel's tone shifted, trying for charm. "Come on, Jan. You've made your point. The joke's over. We just need to know what you're planning so we can move forward." Janet let the silence grow between them until it felt like a third person on the porch. Then, without a word, she stepped inside. Daniel blinked, glancing at Kelly as if to ask whether they were being dismissed or invited. A moment later, Janet returned with a black zippered folder. She opened it slowly, precisely, like someone peeling back a curtain. From inside, she slid out a single document and held it up at chest level, angled just enough for the morning light to catch the raised notary seal. Daniel took a step closer, eyes narrowing. Then he stopped. The name printed at the top was unmistakable. So was the date. So was the line that read, in bold, "Sole owner, Janet Claire Dunning. No Daniel. No Kelly. No shared ownership. No ambiguity." Daniel's face changed all at once. Not a collapse, but a withdrawal, like color bleeding out of a photograph. Kelly stepped forward, blinking hard. That's impossible. You can't. You didn't even tell anyone you were making an offer?" Janet raised an eyebrow. "Didn't realize I owed you that." "But you... how?" Kelly's voice cracked at the edges. "We were all ready. This is our home." Janet's eyes settled on her like frost. "You live in a house you didn't pay for, with a man who didn't read the documents he signed." She let the words settle. "You're not homeowners. You're tenants with an expiration date." Daniel opened his mouth, but whatever protest had formed was already stale. "We're expanding," he said finally, the words brittle in his throat. "We've made plans, contractors, permits." "Then I suggest you check who owns the lot you're planning to extend onto," Janet said. Kelly looked like she'd just swallowed vinegar. Janet flipped the folder shut with a soft snap and tucked it under her arm. "No hard feelings," she said evenly, "but if you're going to draw new blueprints, make sure you're building on land that's yours." Daniel looked down at the porch floor, then back up, jaw flexing. He wasn't used to losing. Certainly not like this. "You did this to humiliate me," he muttered. Janet tilted her head. "No," she said. "I did it to stop disappearing." And she closed the door. On the other side, she heard Kelly's voice rise in a hiss. Something about lawyers. Something about rights. But Janet didn't listen. She walked back through her empty living room. No furniture yet. No framed pictures. just the deed on her table and her name on every page. She picked up her phone. One new message. Ruth. Did he show up? Ruth. Again. Tell me he saw it. Janet typed 2 words. He saw. Then she added a third. Clearly. Janet had barely finished her coffee when the knock came again. This time sharper. Less performative. Less Daniel. More panic. She didn't rush to answer. By the time she opened the door, Ruth was already standing at the end of the walkway, arms folded, sunglasses pushed up in her hair. She gave a tight nod as Janet stepped aside. Daniel barged in without permission, Kelly right behind, her heels snapping like punctuation marks on the hardwood. "This is absurd," Daniel snapped, hands flailing. "You can't just buy the house next door and ambush us like this. You've blindsided us." Janet closed the door behind them with the calm of someone clicking a seatbelt, not for safety, for control. Kelly tossed her designer tote onto the entry table, like ownership could be faked with confidence. "This isn't over," she said, eyes scanning the walls. "You think a deed changes anything? We'll see what the courts say." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "Oh, please. The only thing a court's gonna say is, 'Next case.'" Daniel spun around. "You're enjoying this." "Not as much as she should be," Ruth replied. Janet stayed quiet, still. She moved past them, picked up a slim leather binder from the dining table, and set it down without ceremony. She opened it with clean, deliberate fingers and slid out a packet of documents, fanning them across the table like a magician revealing an impossible hand. "Do you want to know how it happened?" Janet asked, voice level. "It's simple." Daniel laughed bitterly. "Go ahead, enlighten me." She pointed to the purchase agreement. "This is the original contract. Offer made in cash. No financing, no escrow delays. Just a straightforward close." Her fingers tapped the next form. "This is the inspection waiver. Since I've lived next to this house for 13 years, I knew what I was buying." Kelly rolled her eyes. "That's not legal." Janet didn't even blink. "Yes, it is. Here's the county filing receipt. And the stamped deed, recorded 2 weeks ago." Kelly looked to Daniel, waiting for his reaction. He wasn't moving, just staring at the name on the deed again. Like seeing it on paper somehow made it worse. "And this," Janet said, pulling one last paper from the folder, "is the email chain with your so-called contractor who sent blueprints for a project that extends into land that no longer belongs to you." Daniel's face flushed, but it wasn't rage. It was humiliation. "You don't get to do this to me," he said, his voice low and trembling. "You don't get to rewrite the script because you're bitter." Janet looked up slowly, and something in her eyes froze the room. "I didn't rewrite anything," she said. "I just stopped pretending your version was true." Kelly stepped forward. "This is war, Janet. You want to play house in a property battle? Fine. But don't expect it to end quietly." Ruth let out a dry laugh. "War? Honey, this is the quiet version." Janet picked up the binder, slid all the papers back in, and folded it closed. She didn't need to argue. The paper did that for her. "Everything is legal," she said. "Every form filed, every deadline met, every seal stamped." Daniel exhaled hard, dragging a hand down his face. "You're going to regret this." Janet moved toward the door and opened it slowly. "No," she said, cool as glass. "You are." Neither of them moved at first, but the moment she stepped aside, the spell broke. Daniel stormed out without another word. Kelly followed, muttering something under her breath about restraining orders and property rights. Ruth waited until the door shut behind them before speaking. "Well," she said, "that was satisfying." Janet walked back to the table, her hand lingering briefly on the now closed binder. The tension hadn't left her shoulders yet. It wouldn't. Not for a while. But something deeper had changed. She picked up her phone and opened her email. At the top was a reply from the interior designer she'd contacted a week ago. Subject: confirmed. Thursday walkthrough. Body: looking forward to helping you build a space that's all yours. Janet hit reply. Me too. Let's make it unforgettable. Then she pressed send. Thomas's SUV idled in the driveway, windows fogging faintly from the cold. Janet climbed into the passenger seat without fanfare, her coat wrapped tight and her breath steady in the air between them. He handed her a manila folder without a word. She opened it. Inside were photocopies of everything: the stamped deed, zoning confirmations, transactional receipts, time-stamped emails, notarized forms, all in order, all irrefutable. No judge will touch this, Thomas said, turning toward her. It's cleaner than 90% of closings I've handled, and I've seen a lot of bitter men throw money at courtrooms. Janet didn't smile, but she nodded. That was enough. I want to be ready for whatever they try, she said. Thomas tapped the folder. You already are. Later that afternoon, Linda stopped by. Not in her notary blazer this time, just a thick knit sweater and dark jeans, hair pulled back with a red scrunchie. She looked around the entryway like a guest visiting someone finally home. You're solid, she said, flipping through her tablet. Every doc is filed, recorded, sealed. The county website shows you as sole title holder. If they try to challenge, it'll fall apart in 2 seconds. Thank you, Janet said softly. Linda gave her a look, half admiration, half curiosity. You handled it like someone who's done this before. I haven't, Janet replied, but I've watched men pretend they have. Closely. They shared a glance, a brief, wordless recognition between women who had stood in too many rooms where silence was mistaken for submission. The door closed behind Linda with a satisfying click. By the evening, Janet was curled up in the den, legs tucked under a soft throw, logs crackling in the fireplace. The walls were still mostly bare, but warmth clung to the room like breath against glass. Ruth's phone call came through just as she set her coffee down. You won't believe it, Ruth said without greeting. Kelly's blowing up Facebook. Janet chuckled once under her breath. Of course she is. She posted some long, rambling essay about how you ripped a family apart and how bitterness is more dangerous than greed. There are emojis and wine metaphors. Janet raised an eyebrow. She go with Cabernet or Merlot this time? Chardonnay, the cheap kind. Janet reached for her mug again. Let her rant. Noise isn't the same as consequence. Ruth sighed, the kind of sigh that carried satisfaction, not exhaustion. He's shadowboxing now, swinging at reflections, and you're not even in the ring. I never was, Janet said. Outside, snow had started to fall. Not thick, not yet, but soft enough to hush the street and blur the sharpness of the world. A slow, steady dusting. Janet watched it gather on the windowsill. It's funny, she said quietly. What is? How peaceful it feels, she answered. After everything. Just this. The quiet. The certainty. Ruth didn't say anything at first. Then, that's because you're finally somewhere no one gets to rewrite you. Janet let that sit. Let it breathe. They talked a little longer, about cabinets, rugs, paint colors, real-life things, before hanging up. When Janet set the phone down, the silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. She leaned her head back against the arm of the chair and let the fire warm her toes through the socks she didn't care matched. Across the street, Daniel's house was dark in the front windows. Kelly's sedan was missing. No porch light, no laughter, just shadow. Janet didn't stare long. The snow was thickening now, laying itself down in clean lines over roofs, cars, fences. Like the world wanted a reset, and she was ready to meet it. The rumble of the moving truck echoed down the cul-de-sac like a slow-rolling verdict. Janet sat behind the wheel of her car, engine off, keys in her lap, watching the white, boxy vehicle inch closer in her rearview mirror. Another followed, then a third. A fleet. Not loud, not fast, but unmistakable. She stepped out just as the first truck turned toward the driveway of the house she now owned. The cold bit at her cheeks, but the adrenaline was warm, familiar, focused. Across the street, curtains twitched. Then Kelly burst out of the house barefoot in slippers, her robe pulled tight, arms flailing like she was trying to shoo away a thunderstorm. "What is this?" she shouted, jogging toward the curb. "What the hell is this?" Daniel followed seconds later, coat half-zipped, phone already in hand. "Is this a joke?" he barked. "You're not serious." The truck engine cut, and the driver hopped out with a clipboard. Behind him, two workers swung open the cargo doors. Inside, boxes labeled in black Sharpie, clean block letters that read, "Miller, owner, living room. Miller, master bedroom." Kelly's voice pitched up. "They're unloading. They're unloading into our lot. This is trespassing." "No," said Janet, stepping onto the walkway. "This is titled property under my name, officially transferred, fully documented." She held up the folder, the same black one. Only this time, the front flap was turned outward, the deed clipped clean and ready. Daniel walked toward her, chest puffed. "We have a right to challenge this." "You tried," Janet said. "The paperwork held. You were warned." Kelly turned toward the truck. "Stop unloading!" she shrieked. "Don't you dare touch anything." The driver glanced toward Janet, then toward a uniformed officer standing casually near the street. A city cruiser was parked behind the last truck, lights off but visible. The officer gave a single nod. The driver gave a small salute and motioned to his team. The ramp dropped. Dollies rolled. Furniture began to descend like choreography. A cherrywood bed frame, shrink-wrapped bookshelves, boxes labeled with kitchen inventory, office files, linen sets. Ruth stood off to the side, phone up, recording with the steady calm of someone who knew how to frame a narrative. She didn't say a word, just zoomed in slowly as Kelly's hands curled into fists. "This isn't over," Daniel snapped, voice too loud in the morning quiet. Janet tilted her head. "No, it's not." He blinked. Hope flickered. She stepped forward. "The Millers," she said, nodding toward the boxes. "They're renters. Retired military. Sold their place to cover medical costs. They move in today." Kelly turned. "You're letting people move in?" "I'm leasing to them. Short term, with an option to renew." "You can't just—" Janet looked directly at her. "I already did." Daniel paced in place like a dog on a chain, his voice turning brittle. "You can't put strangers that close to our bedroom windows. That violates—" "It doesn't," Janet cut in. "I had the zoning reconfirmed last week." Kelly's face flushed. "We'll call a lawyer. We'll file noise complaints, harassment, anything." "You already tried that," Ruth called out. "Didn't go well." The officer stepped forward, calm, unbothered. "Ma'am," he said to Kelly, "unless you're filing an immediate criminal report, I'm going to ask that you let the movers proceed. They're operating under court-cleared documentation." Kelly turned, stunned. "Are you kidding me?" "I'm not," the officer said. "Everything's in order." Janet let the folder close with a soft, unmistakable snap. Behind her, one of the movers wheeled a tall mirror down the ramp. It caught Kelly's reflection just right. Eyes wide, robe clutched, disbelief painted over vanity. Janet didn't look at her. She turned toward the steps of her new porch and climbed them slowly, the sound of movement continuing behind her. Wheels on pavement, latches clicking, new life unpacking. When she reached the top, she paused and glanced toward Ruth, who lowered her phone just enough to wink. Janet turned back to the street, her voice steady. Consider this the remodel you didn't plan for. Then she walked inside. The office smelled like legal pads and pine cleaner, sterile, still, waiting. Janet sat across from Thomas at the polished walnut desk, hands folded, breath even. She wore no jewelry today, no wedding ring, no watch, no reminders of things that tick down or bind. Thomas looked over his glasses. "You're sure about this?" "Yes," Janet said. She didn't hesitate. He slid the new documents forward. The top page bore the words, "Last Will and Testament of Janet Claire Dunning." Beneath it, her signature line, still blank, waiting for her final say. Thomas tapped the highlighted section. "This revokes all previous versions. Once it's signed and witnessed, it replaces everything." "I know." She glanced at the clause that once named Daniel as her sole beneficiary. It was gone now, fully removed. In its place, a line that carried no emotion, only clarity. All real property, financial holdings, and insurance benefits shall be designated to the Golden Shell Foundation, a 501(c)(3), nonprofit supporting adult literacy in underserved communities. Thomas paused. "You really want to leave the house to them? Not to Ruth? Or a family member?" Janet shook her head. "I want the house to keep speaking even after I'm gone. They'll turn it into something real." He nodded, lips pressing into a thin line of professional respect. "That foundation does good work, quiet but good." "That's the goal," she said. The door behind them opened and Ruth stepped in, cheeks pink from the cold. She wore her old parka and mismatched gloves, but her presence felt ceremonial. "I'm here," she said, raising a gloved hand like a mock salute. "Let the ghosting of men begin." Thomas chuckled and stood. "Right on time. We'll need your signature on the witness line." Ruth slid into the chair beside Janet and scanned the document like it was a screenplay. "Is there a section titled, 'And then she lived better than ever'?" Janet smirked. "It's implied." She reached for the pen. No tremble, no pause. She signed with the same hand that had filed the deeds, submitted the permits, and closed the accounts. The same hand that had once trembled, holding back tears at Daniel's sharpest silences. Not anymore. Ruth signed just below, ink looping freely like a co-signature to a different kind of life. Thomas gathered the pages, tapped them even, and slid them into the envelope. "It's done," he said. "Final, legal, yours." Janet stood slowly, her breath steady. She wasn't floating. She was anchored now, but lighter for it. Outside, the winter air was sharp, but not punishing. It cut clean, like a blade meant for carving, not wounding. The sidewalk glistened faintly where the morning frost hadn't yet burned off. Janet stepped out first. Ruth followed close behind. "I can't believe you gave it all to a library nonprofit," Ruth said, eyes wide. "I thought maybe a shelter or political group or, I don't know, me." "You'll get the couch I haven't bought yet," Janet replied. "And the matching rug." Ruth laughed. "That's cold." Janet stopped at the edge of the curb, hands tucked into her coat pockets. "I spent 20 years making Daniel feel like the center of the story," she said quietly. "This isn't revenge. It's a rewrite." "And how does it end?" Janet looked up. A gust of wind stirred the trees above, sending down a flurry of loosened snow. She closed her eyes and breathed in deep, deeper than she had in years. "It doesn't," she said. She opened her eyes and straightened her spine, not as an act of pride, but of freedom. Then she stepped off the curb and into the next chapter. The phone buzzed once. Then again. Then a third time in quick succession. Janet didn't flinch. She let the screen glow unanswered on the kitchen counter beside her tea, steam curling upward like a slow exhale. She already knew the sender. "Kelly, you made your point. This is cruelty." "Kelly, You've embarrassed us publicly. Kelly. Why are you still holding on to all this? Janet didn't even open them. She slid the phone into the drawer beside the tea bags and closed it with the soft precision of someone sealing off a window before a storm. Her laptop was already open. The donation confirmation filled the screen. Amount donated, $42,000. Recipient, the Golden Shelf Foundation. Note: for expansion of adult literacy access. Use it where voices are still finding themselves. She clicked send. The email disappeared, and the weight of it did too. By the time Ruth arrived 20 minutes later, Janet was already outside, pulling a canvas gardening apron over her coat. "Let me guess," Ruth said, handing her a to-go coffee and surveying the muddy flower bed with exaggerated skepticism. "You woke up and thought, you know what I need? Dirt under my fingernails and lower back pain." "I thought it before I woke up," Janet replied. "This is the good kind of pain." They kneeled by the walkway, scooping soft handfuls of earth, mixing compost and soil. The tulip bulbs had been sorted in small paper bags, colors written in black ink: crimson, cream, fire coral. "Did you ignore her?" Ruth asked, not needing to specify. Janet nodded, planting a bulb deep, the motion smooth and sure. "Blocked her after the third message. I'm not here for the guilt tour." Ruth sipped her coffee and watched her a moment. "You always this calm after burning a dynasty to the ground?" Janet smiled faintly. It wasn't a fire, just a controlled exit. They worked in quiet rhythm for a while. The kind that came easy with real friendship. No obligation to fill space just for the sake of it. Inside the house, soft instrumental music floated from the open windows. A cello, maybe. Something grounded. "Did I tell you?" Janet said, brushing soil from her gloves. "The foundation called this morning. They want to name the mobile library after me." Ruth looked up. "The whole van?" "Apparently." Janet shrugged. "I told them they could skip my last name. Just call it Janet." Ruth raised her coffee in mock toast. "To freedom. And to a literacy van that sounds like a sassy aunt who doesn't take nonsense." Janet tapped her cup against Ruth's, a dry chuckle escaping her lips. They finished planting just as the sun slipped behind a passing bank of clouds. Janet stood first, brushing the dirt from her knees and stretching slowly. She looked down at the fresh rows of covered bulbs, barely visible now, but holding so much underneath. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to imagine leaving him. For years. But I always pictured it like a break. A split. Something jagged." Ruth waited. "This doesn't feel like that," Janet said. "It feels like something's finished, not torn down. Just done." Ruth tucked her gloves into her coat pocket. "That's because you ended the right story. Not just the relationship." They walked back toward the porch, boots thudding against the wooden steps. The house glowed behind them, not brightly but warmly. Nothing inside was extravagant, but it all felt chosen. The new curtains, the second-hand reading chair in the corner, the worn bookshelf from the charity auction last spring. Janet stepped inside first but paused in the threshold. "I don't feel him in here anymore," she said. Ruth looked past her into the house. "That's because this place finally has one narrator." Inside, the fireplace crackled faintly. The couch still didn't have throw pillows. The art wasn't hung yet. The kitchen needed better lighting, but none of it felt incomplete. It felt in motion. Janet placed her gardening gloves on the entry bench and unzipped her coat. There was no performance to her movements. No audience to consider. Just a woman in her own space, warmed by her own agency. She stepped into the kitchen, poured the rest of her tea, and leaned against the counter. Outside, the wind rustled the front yard softly, stirring the soil where spring would soon arrive. No one watching would know what had been dismantled to reach this peace, but that was the point. Let Daniel grumble about legacies lost. Let Kelly scream into voids that didn't echo. Janet didn't need either of them to know what she'd built. The tulips would say enough. The news didn't come in a headline. It came in whispers, shared between neighbors over dog walks and grocery store aisles, passed like folded napkins at coffee counters. By the time it reached Janet, it was less a revelation and more a confirmation. Daniel had filed for bankruptcy. Chapter 13. Restructuring, not surrender. But the words still carried a weight he wouldn't know how to lift. Janet heard it from the mail carrier first, a casual aside while handing off a padded envelope. "Shame about that guy across the street," he said. "Didn't see that coming." She had. It wasn't about money. Not really. Daniel had always spent like permanence was guaranteed. Like confidence could cover deficits. What he never understood, what he refused to learn, was that silence and smiles don't make a foundation. And when the house shakes, it's not the loudest voice that keeps the roof on. That night, Kelly's social media accounts went dark. No brunch photos, no couple selfies in curated lighting. The shared handle, Kelly and Dan Home, was deleted altogether. Janet didn't check often, but Ruth did, and she kept her updated the same way someone reports weather. Calm, brief, detached. "Gone," Ruth said over the phone. "Vanished like a seasonal clearance rack." Janet had been wiping down her kitchen counters when Ruth called. She set the cloth aside and let herself laugh. Once, short and quiet. The quartz surface gleamed beneath her fingertips. Not everyone would notice how new it was, how uncracked, how clean. But she did. "You want to hear something sweeter?" Ruth added. The nonprofit sent a letter. Old-fashioned, handwritten, classy as hell. She arrived 20 minutes later, holding the envelope in one hand and a still warm pie in the other. "I know I should have waited for a weekend," Ruth said, kicking snow off her boots at the door. "But this felt like a Thursday kind of win." Janet opened the letter slowly, not cautious, just reverent. "Dear Ms. Dunning, your generous gift will fund the creation of 3 pop-up literacy hubs across the county. We plan to name the mobile unit after you, just as you requested. Janet will roll out in spring, bringing stories, tools, and dignity to those ready to reclaim their voices. We are honored by your legacy, and we will carry it well." Janet read the last line again, then folded the paper and set it on the counter. Her hand rested on it for a long moment. "You okay?" Ruth asked. Janet nodded. "More than." They sat at the kitchen island with mismatched mugs and pie still steaming in its glass dish. The wind pressed gently against the windows, but the inside held its warmth. "No more posts from Kelly," Ruth said between bites. "I think she finally realized the internet doesn't have a refund policy." "She'll find someone else to perform for," Janet replied. "She always does." "And Daniel?" Janet sipped her tea. "He finally ran out of script." Ruth grinned. "Then here's to rewrites." They clinked their mugs together, gently this time. No theatrics, just shared peace. Later, after Ruth had left and the dishwasher hummed in the background, Janet stepped out to the porch. The tulip bed sat quiet beneath its thin layer of frost, still sleeping, still sure. She wrapped her arms around herself, not for cold, but for presence, and looked out across the street. Daniel's porch light was off, his windows dim. A single trash bin leaned at an awkward angle, half-tipped in the snow. A metaphor he'd never recognize. Janet didn't linger. She walked back inside, locking the door behind her with a soft click. The sound no longer echoed. It landed. She moved through the room slowly, wiping down doorknobs, adjusting a crooked frame, running her hand across the back of the reading chair. There was no performance in it, only attention, care. The life she'd built was quiet, but it rang true. and as she passed the hallway mirror, her own reflection caught her by surprise. Not because it was different, but because it was familiar. She looked like someone she'd forgotten, and now, finally, remembered. Mid-morning light spilled through the wide living room windows, golden and clean. It touched everything. The books stacked by the fireplace, the soft fabric of the reading chair, the vase on the coffee table where Janet was gently arranging a bundle of tulips. Crimson, cream, fire coral. The same bulbs she'd planted in late winter had risen now, bending slightly under their own vivid weight. She clipped each one carefully, shaking loose a few stubborn flecks of soil, and set them into the water one at a time. No rush, no music, just the hush of a house at peace. From the open window, she heard the quiet thud of shoes on the porch next door. Ruth's familiar silhouette passed into view, arms full of canvas tote bags and what looked like 2 cartons of eggs. She paused and waved. Janet lifted her hand in return, the motion easy. No effort, no roles to play. Ruth mimed holding a mug and mouthed, "Coffee at yours later?" Janet nodded. She finished arranging the last tulip and stepped back to take in the full room. The couch still didn't match the rug. The bookshelf had a lean to it. The curtains fluttered too much when the wind caught them just right. It was perfect. On the small entry table near the front door sat a neat stack of incoming mail. She flipped through it absently until a thick envelope with a familiar gold-foiled return address caught her eye. The Golden Shelf Foundation quarterly newsletter, spring issue inside, under a bold headline that read, "Turning Pages, Changing Futures," was a thank you section. Her name wasn't in it, but she didn't need it to be. We're proud to announce the formation of the Miller Fund, made possible through the generosity of a donor who wished for books to outlast bitterness. This spring, mobile units will launch across 3 rural counties. Their mission: deliver literacy tools where silence once ruled. We carry this mission forward with humility and hope. Janet closed the newsletter and placed it beneath a small ceramic dish, the one that held her keys. She'd bought the dish at a yard sale for $2. It was chipped on one side, but she liked the imperfection. That dish had a job. It held her power now. Not symbolic, real. She picked up the keys. One for the front door, one for the mailbox, one for the house next door, one for the little shed in the back. She hadn't decided what to do with yet. Maybe she'd turn it into a writing nook, or let Ruth fill it with herbs and irreverence. The doorbell chimed once, not sharp, but soft, like a suggestion. Janet opened the door to find the mail carrier standing there, cheeks flushed from the breeze. "Afternoon, Ms. Dunning," he said. "Got something from your attorney's office." She signed for the envelope. It was from Thomas. A card, postmarked and embossed. Inside, "Dear Janet, hope the spring air is treating you well. The amendment to the will has been fully registered and finalized. If you ever need anything, legal or otherwise, my door's open. Also, my wife says the tulips you gave her are thriving. Must be something in your soil. Warmly, Thomas." She smiled, placed the card beside the newsletter, and stepped back outside. The sky was brilliant, scattered with soft clouds and the beginnings of a breeze that hinted at summer, but hadn't fully let go of spring. Janet walked slowly to the edge of her porch, pausing to look at the street. Daniel's old house looked smaller now. Not physically, but in presence. Empty porch. No car in the driveway. Curtains drawn, like a stage abandoned mid-performance. No one spoke his name anymore. Not in whispers, not in warning. His legacy had drained away, not in a dramatic collapse, but in quiet erosion. He'd made his mark with noise. She had made hers with roots. Janet turned back toward her door. On the way inside, she stooped briefly to pull a single weed from the flower bed. It came loose easily, no resistance. She placed the weed in the compost bin and stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind her. She locked it, turning the key slowly in her hand, then setting it back in the dish. Not as a reflex, but as ritual. Inside, the house exhaled around her. Clean counters, a pie dish drying in the rack, a shelf of library books waiting to be returned. The framed photo of her and Ruth laughing mid-toast, out of focus but radiant. She ran her hand along the edge of the kitchen island. Outside, the trees shifted gently in the Carolina breeze. She opened the back door, stepped out into the open air, and took the deepest breath she'd taken all year. Not relief, arrival. And as the wind caught the hem of her shirt and the scent of tulips lifted from the earth she had claimed, one sentence surfaced, full, whole, final. He whispered I'd be gone soon, but I stayed, and he's the one who vanished.